Welcome, everyone. We'll be getting started on the hour. In the meantime, you can take a look at the agenda for today. For those of you who just joined, please take a look at the agenda. We'll be starting soon. Welcome everyone to the January CASAS National News and Updates webinar. We'll be starting soon. Hope you enjoyed the biteable videos that we shared. And if you missed them, you can come a little early next time and you'll hear them.
Good morning, everyone. We're at the top of the hour and ready to begin. My name is Karen Berger, and I want to welcome you to CASA's National News and Updates webinar. Next slide, please. Today is January 13th, and we have a nice lineup of presentations prepared for you today. Our presenters include Linda Taylor from CASAS, our Vice President of Assessment Development. Also joining us from CASAS is Technology Specialist Jessie Despain. We are delighted to welcome our colleagues from Elk Grove Adult and Community Education, Vice Principal Patricia Oliva, Admissions Representative Priscilla Perez, and ESL Resource Teacher and Coordinator Carla Slovacek. They have a special presentation to share with us about learning and adapting through COVID at their agency. Thank you, Carla, Patricia, and Priscilla for joining us. We're so looking forward to your presentation. Next slide, please. Many of you may already be familiar with Zoom, but we just want to go over a few features of this webinar. The first point is that your microphones are muted. So the best way to communicate with us with questions about the presentation is through the Q&A. We have a great team prepared to answer your questions, and any questions that are not answered during the webinar will be added to our frequently asked questions or FAQs on the website. The chat box is only to be used for technical difficulties using Zoom. And the last bullet point shows you the link where you can find copies of today's presentations to download. We will also put that link in the chat. Next slide, please. Here's a little graphic about using a Zoom webinar. Of particular interest is the green bubble on the right, highlighting the Q&A, which we already mentioned. This is where you can post your questions about the presentations. Then going from left to right, there's a button at the bottom of your screen where you can check your audio settings. Then the chat feature, which I mentioned, should only be used if you have technical difficulties using Zoom. We will not be using the raise hand feature today due to the large numbers in attendance. Next slide, please. Here's what the Q&A will look like. As you can see, there are two tabs at the top. Click on one tab to see your own questions and answers, or click on the other tab to display all questions and answers. We will be recording this webinar and it will be posted early tomorrow. You can go to CASAS.org to view today's and previous webinars on the CASAS News and Updates page. Now I'll hand the meeting over to Linda.
Thanks, Karen. Again, welcome everyone. Here you can see our webinar topics for today, and we're excited to be back with our monthly national webinars and glad you could attend. We're going to be talking about the new CASAS test series, giving you an update on their status. We're also going to tell you about our needs for collecting demographics to support these research studies for the new series. We are going to be actually not covering it, doing a TE update actually, but we're going to be doing a session from Elk Grove, as Karen just described, about how they've adapted to COVID. We're going to do a remote testing update, and then we're going to tell you some CASAS news. So the new CASAS test series is our first topic. And many of you have seen this before. Nothing has changed, but we do want to make sure everyone's aware of the situation. And that is for our ABE, the reading goals for ABE ASE is approved through 2025. The math goals changed late last year to be approved through 2023. That was an extension. For ESL, it's the status quo, except that these tests are now approved through 2023. As far as our new test series for ABE and ASE, it's just as I just described. For ESL, we have developed new ESL series, but currently their status as far as being approved is pending. And that is, as you can well imagine, partly due to the challenge of being able to collect data that we need to submit these tests because of the pandemic. All of these series are aligned to the CASAS, College and Career Readiness Standards and the ELP standards for ESL. The listening and reading for ESL series that are in development, just a few things about them. They will replace life and work when they're approved in 2023. This time we're going to have 5 skill levels rather than 4 for reading, which it is currently, or 3 for listening. And that's going to, we think, really help in probably reducing the amount of retesting you'll be doing and getting a more accurate result. These tests, as I mentioned, are aligned to the ELP standards and to the NRS descriptors, and they're designed to measure the college and career readiness standards. So we did mention this in November, but we're again asking, we need your help. What we're finding when we're doing our field testing and our studies is that we are getting responses, but because many of you are not collecting these 4 demographic elements in e-tests. We know that you do them through other means, other kinds of platforms that you use to collect this information for your students, but we are humbly requesting and earnestly asking if you could please consider also collecting these, because when, as you may know, we have some field test items embedded in our tests, and we cannot use those results unless we have these demographic fields also. A student only needs to enter this information one time, and that is so that when they're pre-testing, or if they're continuing students, whenever they test, if you enter them, and then any subsequent tests, they would already be there. They would not have to do it again. So it's just a one-time effort that we really would appreciate, because it'll help us be able to do these NRS submissions. So now I'm going to hand it over to Jessie Despain, who is going to give you a demonstration about how to do this in e-tests. Go ahead, Jessie.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm going to show my screen here and how you can enable those 4 fields. It's pretty simple. Just one moment, please. Let me share my screen with you all. Okay, so I've gone to the Rolling Hills simulation server. I'm going to log in here as a coordinator. And what this brings you to initially is the testing sessions. We're going to modify the testing session templates instead, because that in turn modifies all of your sessions. So all of these testing sessions are derived from the templates. Changing the templates will modify all of your sessions. And in this case, we have a bunch of them here because this is a demo database, but you're likely to have only 2 or 3 templates. So I'm going to make sure to edit each one of those. I'm going to edit this first one here. So I've gone to testing session templates. I click the edit button. And then we'll go to this data tab. And this is where the data is collected. So these are the pages that have been specified to be collected, the types of information. The one that I've selected here already has student info. This is something you cannot remove. It's totally required. It's a student's ID and name. That's how it's connected to their information in the database. Barriers to employment happens to be already collected here. And so what I can do is remove that one if I like. I'll use this right arrow, and then we're down to just the bare student info. And now over here on the right side on the available column, I'm looking for those fields that Linda mentioned. So here's gender. I'll select that one and click the left arrow here. That sends it over. So now it's one of the selected items, and the student would be asked for their gender upon logging into eTests. We're also going to do native language, and a little shortcut that you can do instead of using this left arrow if you prefer is to double click on the item. So I'll double click native language. Of course it doesn't work. There we go. Native language comes over to the left. And then another one is ethnicity. So I've sent those, let's see. Oh goodness. Birth date, sorry. Okay, so I've added all of those. And then what you can do once they're all in here, let's say the first thing I want to ask is the ethnicity. So I can use this up and down arrow to reorder them, and I'll send it all the way to the top. So the way this is set up now, the ID and name would be asked for first, followed by the ethnicity. The next page would ask for the gender, the native language, and then the birth date at the end. What you do is click save here. That has in turn changed all of these sessions, the ones that have a template for ABE ASE, because that's the one I just modified. And if you have any others, then just go right on and edit those as well. That is it for now. And if you have any questions about this process or need assistance, please contact CASAS Tech Support. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Jesse. So now I'm just going to show you that in the PowerPoint that is on the CASAS website that you can access, there are slides that capture what Jesse just showed you. So I'm not going to go through them with you, but just so you know that these are here, and you'll be able to reference them and easily and stop and see them clearly. So that's there in the PowerPoint that's on the CASAS website. So again, we actually do have a resource that can help you work with your students to complete these demographic fields in eTests, and that is on the CASAS website. So as I said, this PowerPoint is also on the website, so you'll be able to click on this link, but it's basically in our social media newsroom / webinars place on the website. So that'll, it's actually, you could consider it a lesson for students to be able to complete demographics, which they have to do in other contexts, as I'm sure you know. Just quickly want to mention about our field testing studies. Mainly we are looking for adult learners in ESL programs or ABE students whose first language is not English, in other words, non-native speakers of English. We are trying to get this done in the spring of 2021. We may continue it after that. We completely understand that your priorities are to get your own testing done, but if there is any chance that you could help us with field testing as well, then we would very much appreciate it. It can be done on either e-tests or paper pencil. We have a need for both. You would be giving the locator and the appraisal in one or two of these level tests. There is an incentive for students, and agencies on e-tests can get complimentary web test units. So if you want to get started, There is a place on the CASAS website on the far right of the homepage where you can see all the information about doing it. And you can contact Karen Berger, who is one of your hosts today. She is our coordinator of field testing. So now, without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to the team from Elk Grove Adult and Community Education, who are going to share with you some very practical strategies that they adopted and created for doing their remote e-testing during this pandemic. So Patricia Oliva, Vice Principal of Elk Grove Adult and Community Education, will begin.
Thank you, Linda. Hello, everyone. We are very excited to be with you today. Again, I am Patricia Oliva, and I'm the Vice Principal at Elk Grove Adult and Community Education. Joining me today for this presentation is Priscilla Perez, Admissions Representative, and Carla Slovacek, our ESL resource teacher. Our goal today is to share our experience and how we have adapted to CASAS testing students during this COVID time. Next slide, please. Let me start by giving you a little background information on our school. Elk Grove Adult Ed was founded in 1961. Our first students were native speakers and Hispanic and Portuguese speakers. Back then, our classes focused on high school diploma acquisition and citizenship preparation. In 1961, we served about 83 students. Our enrollment has increased since then. Prior to COVID-19, we typically served around 2,000 students in a school year. Due to COVID, we currently are serving about 857 students so far this year. Next slide, please. On the left of the slide, you will find student demographics for 2019-2020. A quick shout out to CAREC, our Capital Adult Education Regional Consortium, for helping us aggregate this data and for providing a snapshot of our school students. And on the right side of the slide, you will find student demographics for this school year to date. As you can see, our student demographics percentage-wise have not changed drastically. The most significant change would be student enrollment numbers. As mentioned before, in the 2019-2020 school year, we served 2,224 students. This year, we have served about 857 students so far. Our ESL population percentages have stayed about the same. There has been a slight increase in basic skills, high school diploma, and high school equivalency enrollment, as well as a slight increase in students ages 40 to 49. Next slide, please. Some of the steps we took to CASAS test our students included, first, choosing the least complicated approach for students. After some staff discussion, we decided that to do that, we would give students the options of either testing remotely or in person by one-on-one appointments. We then established our remote proctor team and coordinated training to include diverse staff members. We also determined incentives for students, such as free textbooks or a free high school equivalency test. Next slide, please. Next, we scheduled students for pre-testing. We staggered testing by programs and by level. We started CASAS testing returning students first, and then we moved on to new students. We then collected feedback and began planning for post-testing. We reviewed our process and identified what worked and what needed tweaking. We looked for ways to improve the student experience. We found that involving teachers, making phone calls to confirm appointments, and emailing students was extremely helpful. Finally, we scheduled students to post-test. As we did before, we staggered appointments by program and levels. Next slide, please. Our CASAS testing team grew this year. Typically, we would have 3 or 4 proctors to test our students. This year, our team consists of instructional support office staff, job center coaches, paraeducators, program resource teachers, and administrators. We have 4 lead proctors and 12 supporting proctors. Through this process, our lead proctors manage all our class rosters and often partnered with others for training and practice sessions. Thank you. Next slide, please.
Hey, this is Janice Vera, Program Specialist in California. Patricia, there's one question in the chat. Judith is asking if you could give her any examples about how do you pay for the free HSE testing? Is it through vouchers or any suggestions, please, on that?
We provide vouchers. So we have some funding we can use for that. So the school has bought vouchers to incentivize students taking a test, persisting, taking a post-test, and then supporting them in their goal of acquiring a high school equivalency certificate.
Great. That's very innovative. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia and Janice. Hi, everyone. I'm Carla, and I'll be picking up from here. Training for our proctor team began with CASAS support. We attended webinars and watched the videos. Our team members also completed the remote proctor certification training, and we studied the guidelines for one-on-one remote control testing. For our collaborations, we held meetings to discuss training feedback and establish pairs and groups, practice pairs and groups. We practice from home, we practice from the campus, we practice during the day and evening hours as well. And to get a better feel for the devices, we practice on desktops and laptops. Next slide, please. Our lead proctors created a scheduled template, which was shared on our Google Drive. Each proctor had a dedicated page or tab in the master spreadsheet, and I'll be showing you an example of a completed schedule in the following slide. Each proctor was assigned a class roster and called the students on that list. During the call, proctors explained the process, scheduled the test, and then checked for tech access. Primarily, they were checking to ensure that the student had a computer, laptop, or tablet to use on the test date. And then I believe CASAS or Janice, they shared the template, a link for this schedule, which you can modify and change to suit your needs.
Yes, it's posted on the CASAS website, along with where the registration was for today's presentation and a copy of the PowerPoint from Elk Grove.
Thank you, Janice. Next slide, please. So here's a copy of Mandy's schedule for the week of September 21st, 2020. So each proctor's testing schedule and class list was accessible to the entire team and posted to our Google Drive. At the very bottom, I don't know if you can see it, but the very bottom of this screenshot, there are tabs for each proctor, and I've highlighted Mandy's tab in pale yellow. Each proctor was responsible for completing their schedules with the required information, which included names, ID numbers, notes, and then the last column in that template was an area where the proctor could note whether the Zoom invite had been sent and primarily if the student had been reached. Regarding Zoom, our district provided us, each one of us, with individual licensed Zoom accounts. So I'd like to point out that an advantage to sharing a master schedule like this was that we could look up available appointments with other proctors to accommodate a student's request to reschedule. Offering students the flexibility to reschedule an appointment was really important for us, and so we wanted to be able to offer that. Then as proctors were brought on board, practice sessions were scheduled, and you can see on this copy here the pink row going across there. We brought on board Susie when she joined us for proctoring, and Mandy and Terry, just scheduled those practice dates right in their typical day, their typical pre-testing day. Next slide, please. So this is a visual representation of our pre-testing period for returning students. We staggered testing to begin with upper level ESL and ASE students. This gave our proctors some time to hone their process for remote testing before approaching our intermediate low and beginning high ESL students. Our district permitted us to serve students in person, one-on-one for assessment purposes. So as a team, we plan to test our beginning low students in person. However, we always offered remote testing as an option. Each student testing in person completed a COVID symptom check or screening upon arrival and was only admitted into the testing room upon clear completion of that, checklist that we had. We began pre-testing our beginning low students in person in mid-early August and completed them in early September, mid to early September. As you can see, the majority of our students tested remotely and just a smaller fraction tested face-to-face in person. We completed the majority of our pre-testing by the end of September with makeups rolling over into the month of October. Let's see, Patricia will pick it up from here to talk about new student registration for adult secondary ed.
I have one question. If I can go back to Carla, please. There were a few questions in the Q&A talking about as your team was building their knowledge base and they were coming up to speed. Can you give us an estimate of how many hours it took to take a typical teacher and then train them to also do proctoring? It seems like you have a sort of all hands on deck, go get them attitude, which I really, really love to hear about. Maybe could you speak to that a little bit?
Sure, thank you. Absolutely. The first thing we plan were the videos and the webinars that, those were hour-long training sessions. And then we did that as a group. We did it with the lead proctors to begin with. And then we each individually completed the certification training. And I can't recall exactly how many minutes that took, but it wasn't that long if I recall, Janice. Can you, 30 minutes max, I think.
Right.
So, and then I think what may have taken the most time were the pair practice sessions. And at least I would go at least a half dozen practice sessions before our proctors got really comfortable with the process. Now, they didn't take the full test, obviously. They would go through part A and part B and follow the script and the guideline, and that was quite helpful. So, as soon as the test began, we would stop the session, our practice session there, and end it. So at least practice hours, I would say 3 to 4 practice hours, at least trying 6 attempts per pair.
And then practicing remotely, that was one of the other questions.
Yes, indeed, that was practicing remotely. So sometimes we would practice within our different, I'd be in one office, someone else would be in another classroom, or we would do the home campus practice sessions.
Are you going to speak at all about the sequence of your onboarding process? Do you have your students pre-test before they attend any classes, or is there a counseling session? Could you speak to that, or maybe Patricia?
I can talk a little bit of how we
Carla.
enroll students. So that would be our next slide. So new student registration. We have made some changes to our student intake process. Our adult secondary students fill out a Google interest form that is posted on our website. They can also call the front desk, and the front desk can help them with that. Once they fill that survey out, they then get a fillable PDF registration, and then they send that back to us. Once they send that back to us, the academic advisor sends them a link to make an appointment with her and academic advisor / counselor. And then they meet. It's a one-on-one appointment through Zoom, and they talk about how we register, the testing process, their goals, and class expectations. Once they're done with that session, the academic advisor will refer them over to our lead ASC proctor for pre-testing. And then once they pre-test, they get placed in a class. That's our ASC process. And before COVID, we would have them fill out a registration form online. They would get an appointment. We would see them in a group. So we would have group registration. So they would have a classroom where they would test. We would have an orientation, and then they would meet in a different room with an academic advisor and then get placed in class. So the main difference now is that with ASC, most of our registrations are remote, including testing, and our students typically get tested before they start a class. There are some exceptions, you know, if that is needed for a student, but for the most part, most of our testing and our registration for ASC has been remote. And I'll have Priscilla talk to us about the ESL process. Thank you.
Hello. For the pretest, we began registering the new students in September based on the space availability. The appointments were posted on our school website via ASAP. That's our attendance and registration database. We collect student demographics by emailing a fillable PDF of our registration form and a copy of a translated form for reference. We have 7 different languages that were provided by our CAREC, which is our consortia. Students are asked to return the form by email, either by completing it online or scanning it or taking a photo and just returning it by email. Pre-test options are one-on-one via remote testing or one-on-one in person at our main campus. At the in-person appointment, so the people who come in to our main campus, they will be completing a symptoms checklist. Post-testing, the next slide, please. Post-testing began in November with our advanced level. Due to the C19 spike and our district guidelines, we weren't able to test people in person, our students in person. Beginning level successfully tested remotely. We are currently completing the makeups. So the month of January, we're just doing all the makeups. We had a lot of students who were not able to attend the meetings, the Zoom meetings in the month of December. Our next slide, please. We have 605 enrollees, students who qualify for the NRS Table 4, which includes the requirements of at least 1 test, required demographics, and 12 hours of instruction. The persisters rate was, our persisters rate is 69% of students with a pre and post test for the first semester of the 2020 to 2021 program year. 20% of our testing was in person and 80% of our testing was remote testing. For the persisters report is a report that uses data from the federal table 4 and 4B to show students who remain in the program long enough to have a pre and post test. Carla?
Thank you. Next slide, please. Thank you, Pris. So each year at the end of the fall term, we administer a school-wide student survey via Google Forms. And as you can see from the comments, students found remote registration and testing to be a positive experience overall. One comment that stood out for us came from a beginning high ESL student. Quote, "I always feel nervous taking the test in class. I was not nervous at home." So we'd like to end by saying that our greatest takeaway from this experience was patience, flexibility, and primarily teamwork. We couldn't have done it without the support of our district administration and our incredible staff. I think we will be continuing to provide remote testings. Hopefully, once this is all over, it'll become part of our intake process and testing process. Next slide, please. This concludes our presentation. Thank you for the opportunity to share. And Janice is waiting finger at me. So.
I do have two questions for you. As far as your vision, you started, could we go back one slide, Karen Berger, please? If that's okay. I love these quotes. I think that really does kind of summarize a little bit of the feedback that CASAS is hoping to hear from students. Do you have a vision for the spring semester? Are you planning to continue to offer remote testing, even if COVID, subsides and we're able to go back on campus?
I'll go ahead. So
Go
this
ahead.
is Tricia. Yes,
Thank
I
you,
think
Tricia.
so. These have been challenging and stressful times, but the silver lining is that it pushed us to try out new things or things that we didn't have either the resources or the time, or it just couldn't happen because we had a system going on that worked. We have found that remote testing does address a lot of the barriers our students face in enrolling class. If we don't, like for instance, when we schedule registration, if they can't come in that specific day or time when we did the group ones, then they would have to wait. So having this individualized way of serving our students has been great. It's been a really good experience, and I do see us continuing this once things settled, and it's as part of our new processes in the upcoming school year.
Great. And there was one kind of a detailed question for you, Patricia. Does your school have like a rolling enrollment so that a student can start classes at any time during the program year, or are you kind of in a semester sort of a setting?
For ASC, meaning high school equivalency, and ASC, it's open enrollment. As seats open up, we enroll students if the classes aren't full. So it's ongoing process throughout the school year. For ESL, typically it is somewhat managed. So we have certain times in the year where we do registration and orientation. At this point, we've had, in this school year, we had one testing session or registration session before the winter break, and then that came to a halt. And we're now looking into doing a version of what we're doing in ASC for ESL. So we're collecting their interest in, they're filling out information on an interest survey. We connect with them, provide a registration, and we're hoping to bring them in to either test remotely or one-on-one if restrictions permit.
There's also a question I saw in the chat asking about the technology that your students have. Do most of your students have computers at home with internet access, or how are you bridging that digital divide with them?
Most of our students do have, at the very least, a smartphone. Most households do have a computer. With K-12 kids, also learning from home. There's at least, if they do have children in the school district, their children do have a laptop or a Chromebook that they sometimes share with their parents. But then we're also looking at the possibility of checking out Chromebooks. So far, there hasn't been a need. What we hear when students know that we're doing everything online, synchronous and asynchronous for ESL, and just mostly an independent study format for ASC, they know that they will require technology. And so far, our surveys show that it hasn't really been an issue. So yeah, for some people have decided to go and buy something, and it's not a hardship for them, but for the most part, they have access to some kind of technology.
And I think there were a lot of questions about the technology when the student only has access to a cell phone. You use the method where the student would see, but they would verbally communicate. I think CASAS calls that approach number 4. And then the instructor would be able to mark the answers in e-tests, correct? I think that's.
I think Priscilla can speak to that.
Yeah, I'll go ahead. Yeah, so the one-on-one oral response was our fallback position. And this is where teachers really played a role. We would, of course, teachers knew of testing schedules, so they would give their students a heads up And students rose to, as far as, try to make sure if you can borrow a Chromebook, or schedule a time if you can use your child's Chromebook or laptop. So pick a time when they're not using it. That was that flexibility in scheduling, but teachers getting involved in the process and not warning. I don't want to use the word warn, but letting them know, letting them start planning for it. And students, we were really surprised. They made it work. They found the technology to take the tests. So our teachers were very crucial with helping us out with the technology issue.
I see a few things also in the chat from other agencies that I've worked with. Mount Diablo Adult Ed in Concord was commenting to the panelists that that's what they've been doing as well. When the lowest level ESL students who are challenged or don't have computer skills, default goes down to that cell phone so that we can engage them.
Sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, just want to clarify that we are doing a pilot test of using cell phones for remote testing, but currently it's not permitted to use a cell phone with the listening and the reading tests that are NRS approved. We are piloting that, but currently they would have to find a Chromebook and use a cell phone on the side, or they would need to use a laptop or another device. So,
Good
okay.
Clarification. Thank you, Linda.
Sure.
So there was another question about the number of proctors. I think that was back on a prior slide. So it looks like you had lead proctors in each of the different instructional programs and then additional proctors that were working with students. On an average, how many students could a proctor test a day using one-to-one? I guess it takes an hour, and so maybe 6 or 8 students at the most per day.
So we had 4 lead proctors and then 12 support proctors. So the lead proctors took the bulk of the proctoring. And if I can't call up Mandy's schedule, but Mandy would probably fit in a lead proctor schedule would probably fit in about 4 or 5, I would say for sure 5 students. Pris, is that correct? About 5 per day. So, and then support staff were brought in if we were falling a little behind, or if we had to accommodate and reschedule someone and the lead proctor was booked. So it was really a team effort, but so figure, 4 proctors round the clock and then support staff helping.
I think we're about out of time, but I wanted to just say thank you so much, ladies from Elk Grove. Enjoyed your presentation so much. If there are additional questions, we'll go ahead and circle back to some of the questions in the Q&A offline. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Very much appreciate all these very practical, creative solutions that you've done. Let's see, let me go back to the PowerPoint. And now we're going to get into the remote testing update from CASAS. Just to remind you, these are the 4 approaches to remote testing that are currently approved. The remote control one-on-one is what Elk Grove, as they described, used. And occasionally they use the oral responses, but I just want to reiterate, I know you all are trying to work with the situations you find yourselves in with students not having devices, but it is not currently permitted to use cell phones, but you can do the oral responses with students that are using the other devices. I'm going to show you in a minute on the website which student devices are permitted. So there are these 2 one-on-one approaches, remote control or oral responses. And if you want to test more than 1 student at a time, you can use approach 2 or 3 for multiple test takers with a Windows 10 PC or on Chromebooks. But the Chromebooks needs to be in what we call kiosk mode. Now the guidelines provide detailed directions, and if you're just getting into this, we really ask you to read them carefully and then come and talk to us, because you really can't go ahead with this without reading them. And we try to include examples from Zoom so that you can have an idea, even though you don't have to use Zoom, you could use another platform, but that should give an idea of how to go about it. So I want to cover what are some of the directions that we're moving in, because these 4 approaches I mentioned were what we felt comfortable putting out to begin with to allow you to get going with remote testing. But we are trying out, as I mentioned, pilot testing with some limited number of agencies, the idea of testing more than 5 at a time, which is currently the limit. And they are trying that out, and we are well into the pilot, and hopefully in the next couple months we'll be able to see those results and let you know if we can expand the number of students you can test at a time beyond 5. Of course, that would only be if the proctor is comfortable and experienced generally. A new proctor would probably not be ready to do more than 1 or 2 or 3, and maybe up to 5. As I mentioned, the listening, reading, and math on phones is in pilot mode, so that is not currently permitted. But again, depending on what we find in these pilots, we may be able to allow that. We shall see. In addition, and related to the phone testing, is that we are working on developing video within e-tests as integrated into e-tests, so that right there in the test session you'd be able to enable the video, and that would mean that you wouldn't also have to have Zoom running. So this would be a great efficiency in doing remote testing. It's something we're still working through, and so as we get closer to beta and then pilot and then finally testing and then getting it out to you, we will keep you informed as that evolves. Finally, with some of you have asked for a third-party proctoring service like Pearson's OnView or ProctorU. We are exploring these possibilities, and we are not exactly sure of the level of interest. So we would appreciate it if this is something you feel you could afford, because it does cost a lot more. But you might decide that, well, that's something that is an efficiency for you and you can manage it. Please let us know so we can know how to proceed with this additional option. Wanted to mention that for listening, that is something that you can do remotely. Apparently there's been some hesitation or confusion in the field about whether it's permitted. It is. And we have opened that out to be able to use headphones or earbuds when you do remote testing of listening. And what we're finding is that some programs that only were testing and reading are now realizing that perhaps they could think about testing listening in addition or instead. And that might work out better perhaps for some low-level ESL students or any level of ESL. You can use the NRS-approved 980 listening tests. So we encourage you to consider that option if that could work out well for you. And if you're not already familiar with the listening tests, you can go to the CASAS test sampler yourselves, and also encourage your students to do that before they take the test, so they're familiar with how that test is formatted and presented in e-tests. I do want to remind you, this is sort of the slide that I do show every month, but it does seem to be necessary. I saw a few comments in the chat box that reinforce my conviction to show this every month, that we want you to be creative, but we really hope that you could adhere to these limitations. And that is that you may not copy, scan, or reproduce, as in make a PDF or in any way copy a CASAS paper test and show it in a Zoom on the screen. That is not permitted. So you can only use e-tests if you're doing remote testing and not paper tests. If the student comes into your program, of course, in person, then you can do paper testing. But if they're remote, the only solution currently is to use e-tests. So you may not also send a paper test out to students, because then there's no control of that paper version. And again, we don't ask you to record the testing session. In fact, it's not permitted. So again, please do be creative, but if you've read the guidelines carefully, which we really hope you will, and and you see something that you think is within the guidelines, but you're not sure, please contact us at remotetesting@casas.org to confirm that something you're thinking about doing is permitted. We do not take it lightly to make these restrictions. We would like to, give you as many options as we can. And that's why we are offering these webinars every month to kind of help everyone learn from each other and be creative as much as possible. But please do follow the guidelines. I do want to talk about this trend that Elk Grove beautifully demonstrated, is that although testing multiple test takers at a time may seem like it would be more efficient, you may find that doing one-on-one remote testing is somehow easier, because if you want to bring on more staff to be involved and get it done, then you could involve staff that have less technology expertise, and they could still be trained. They'd have to be trained to become an e-test proctor. And it may just be easier to do the scheduling. And, we were hearing is with the testing multiple test takers, you may think you have 5 students lined up, but only 2 or 3 of them actually show up. So then it may just be easier to work one-on-one and just get it done that way. And what we're hearing a little bit is that some of you out there may have been reluctant to start remote testing, but now with the understanding that the pandemic is ongoing, and that you would like to get some MSGs this program year, or whatever is your state policy, but that you may decide to embark on this. And if you do, you might consider doing it in probably the simplest way, which would be one-on-one with that remote control option. Another caveat is that if you are by any lucky chance getting some money to purchase hardware, and if your district for some reason has decided to buy Chromebooks, then what we recommend strongly is that before you give them out to students, that you put them in kiosk mode, and that will allow you to use the Chromebooks for remote testing, because that kiosk mode is what gives the test security to be able to for the students to use them to take the test remotely. They still need to use another device like a phone for Zoom, because you can't do that at the same time as taking the test on the Chromebook. But again, most students do have access to a phone in addition to a Chromebook somehow in their house, or they can get a hold of one. Or if you do have money and you can manage it, if you can get a laptop with Windows 10, even better. So anyway, any of your innovative ideas, we'd love to hear. In a minute, I'm going to go to the CASAS website and show you a little bit more about some of these resources. But I want to tell you first about the reading level indicator. This is something that if you're having incoming students now with a new term, you may consider using. It's a way of getting students into class without taking an NRS approved pretest. So this is something that the U.S. Department of Ed in a way encouraged, that to get an informal assessment for provisional placement without giving an NRS approved pretest, you can use an informal assessment. So we developed this form 601R, and it's very different from our NRS approved tests in that it doesn't require a proctor. It can be taken on a mobile phone or any other device. There is an online version, but there's also a paper version. If you do the online version, it's free if you're using TE and E-tests, or just TE actually. It is targeted to all levels of ABE and ASE, and there is a limitation. It's not for the very lowest levels of ESL, but just level 3 and higher. What it gives is an estimated NRS EFL for ABE or ESL, no scale score, but that should help you to get them into a class to begin with. And then once you can go ahead and give an NRS approved pretest in order to get an MSG. So you can't use this RLI instead of an NRS approved test, but you could use it to get students into class. Now I want to get into some CASAS news. And one exciting thing that we are announcing today is that the CASAS National Summer Institute will be held this year. It's going to be virtual. The dates are over a 2-week period, the 17th and 18th of June and the 22nd and 23rd of June. So registration is opening Friday, and you'll be able to go onto the CASAS website to see all about it. The first week's sessions will be the trainings, and the second week sessions will be sessions and panels and workshops. So we're very excited about it, and we hope that you'll be able to attend. In fact, we're imagining that maybe more of you will be able to attend than usual, and even some of you who may have never come to the Summer Institute this year may be able to come. So we're very excited about that. Also, we are offering what we call live facilitated trainings, and there's one on TOPS Pro Basics that's coming up. The next one is on February 19th. You can register for that on the CASAS website. And also, so that's on from 10:30 to 12 on the 19th. That is Pacific time. And also, we have other live facilitated trainings of our new training modules. The next one of those is tomorrow, and it's on Module 4, Test Results and Reports. And I'm going to show you in a second where to register for that on the CASAS website, but we'll be offering, as you can see, there are more offerings in February, and you do get a certificate of completion for these. Our next monthly news and updates webinar is going to be on the 17th of February, same time. And you can register in the same place that you registered today on the news and updates webinar page on the CASAS website. You can register today right after the session. We'll be putting up that information. Here are some contacts. And again, this is in the PowerPoint, which is posted on the website. And right now, I'm going to actually go over to the CASAS website and show you a few things. Let's see, here we go. Can you see this? Can someone on the staff make sure that this is showing?
Yes.
Great, thank you. So if you look on, this is our homepage. If you look on the right in the What's New section, you'll see that we have CASAS office hours, which actually, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention. We are offering those. Let me just bring that up so you can see that. Every Friday at 11 Pacific and 2 Eastern, and times in between, you can come and ask questions of any type of CASAS staff. We have a team from all the departments available. If you had a question that you felt like you wanted to hear a better answer from, or a longer answer from, or you realize you have additional questions from today or at any point, please join us for these sessions that are live, and we have staff to help you there. Back to the home page, you can, the live facilitated training tab is right here. That's how you can register for these modules and the TOPS Pro Basics. If you want to sign up for field testing, it's here. And then this National News and Updates webinar tab will take you to the place on the website where you can you can see already the materials from Elk Grove are posted. And so is also the PowerPoint from today, and their template for how to schedule their test sessions is also here. I do want to also take you to the remote testing, which is this big link here. The remote testing page has everything about remote testing. And so it has how to register stations remotely. There's a video for that. The summary chart that I told you earlier I was going to show you. And this is, if you look here on test taker devices, this tells you which test taker devices are permitted for each of these 4 approaches. So if you're going to do a remote control, make this a little bit bigger. If you're going to do the one-on-one remote control, as Elk Grove was describing today, you can use a Mac, a PC, an iPad, or a tablet. If you're going to do one of the multiple test taker ones, it is more limited. The one-on-one oral responses, you have more options, including Chromebooks. That's the one that you don't need the kiosk mode for that. You can do that without that. All right, so back to the remote testing page. We have FAQs that we keep updating. We have videos. This is we have the guidelines, the detailed guidelines for each of these approaches, which really is essential for you to review. And the reading level indicator information is here, and the remote testing agreements that you must fill out if you're going to start doing this. All right, so let me go back to the PowerPoint. I'll ask if you have any more questions, please do enter them in the Q&A section. Let's see if I see that there's, oh yes, Sue Pearson has just entered a request for us to mention that NEDP is now completely, you can offer it remotely. This is something that was in the works, and we were able to roll it out just in time for the pandemic. So this is the National External Diploma Program. It's a way to award a high school diploma. If you're interested, you can go on the CASAS website and go on the NEDP page, and you can learn all about it. So it is remote, and it's something we would very much like you to consider. I see that we have a few more pending questions. So if you have anything still you'd like to ask, please do. We'll give you another few minutes. We can hang on. Our staff can hang on. If people do have more questions, we're happy to answer them. And we are at the top of the hour, so I would say let's formally end the session. If you have to leave, we thank you very much for your participation today, and look forward to seeing you next month. And if you would like to stay on, and if you have additional questions, please feel free to do so. We'll keep the line open for a little while longer.